Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, the creator and founder of Genetic Insights and the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint, Elwyn Robinson. And today we are doing part two, our follow-on of Elwyn's number one supplement recommendations. And there were a few caveats if you caught the first part. If you haven't, I'll make sure I put the link in the description below so you can check it out. But today we are carrying that list on so Elwyn can tell us the number one supplements that he recommends for certain things. So Elwyn, shall we just kick it off and go straight into our first one for this episode?
Let's go straight into it.
Perfect. Now this category, sleep. So what is your number one recommendation for sleep?
Yeah, so this is a good one. I struggle with sleep, honestly. It's probably my biggest challenge, but I find that this is pretty effective for me. But everyone I've given to try it says it's very effective for them. So I'm pretty confident to recommend it. It's actually got loads of different benefits. I'm going to list a handful of them. But it's a substance called Emodin.
Okay, what is Emodin?
So Emodin is one of the constituents of cascara and also rhubarb. It's an aloe vera. It's a bitter compound, but it does a lot of very interesting things. It's primarily sold, that I've seen it sold on its own anyway, as an anti-cortisol agent. So something that lowers cortisol, but it does a lot of interesting stuff as well. And so let's talk about practical level before we talk about, studies and stuff like that. So on a practical level, I recommend it to people for two reasons. Either because they are stressed, in which case I have a alcohol extract, like a tincture, and then I get people to just rub it on the skin to be absorbed that way. The reason for that is because it's not very well absorbed orally. So I'm pretty sure that it's theorized that with cascara and rhubarb and aloe vera to some degree, one of the reasons why they have a laxative effect is because that Emodin is not very well absorbed and it creates that effect. There are definitely other things in all those herbs I just said, but it's one of the things that has that impact. So it's less than 2% absorbed through the intestines. But the alcohol extracts, when applied to the skin, it seems to get straight into the bloodstream pretty well, and it seems to have a pretty powerful effect. The other reason I recommend it to people practically, which is still related to sleep, is because it's not guaranteed, but it can reduce muscle tightness, muscle spasming, muscle cramping. And so if a person is suffering with those issues and maybe that's impacting their sleep, it can also be effective for that.
Okay, because in our first episode, in part one of your recommended supplements, you did talk about Cascara sagrada for constipation.
Yep.
So with this Emodin, even part of it's coming from that. You did say it does have some laxative effect, but so will it here on this way if somebody's trying to take it for sleep?
If they do it orally, yeah, like I've seen an Emodin supplement being sold, I think as a cortisol blocker, that was a capsule. And yeah, that could still definitely have a laxative effect. The kind of tincture applied to the skin methods that I'm more used to using for sleep, stroke relaxation, stroke anti-cortisol purposes, no, my experience of that is it doesn't really have that effect. But some of the effects it has are interesting. So one of them is that it does actually increase insulin sensitivity. And it also lowers blood glucose. So I've seen some people say anecdotally in forums and stuff that they feel like it drops their blood sugar too low if they have an empty stomach. So for some people, that would be a reason perhaps to not have it on an empty stomach or far away from a meal if you have a tendency for hypoglycemia. I have not, experienced that personally, but it's something to consider. So that's one thing. But for most people, their blood glucose is probably too high. Their insulin is probably too high. So for most people, I think that's probably beneficial, but something to be aware of if you have that. It lowers cholesterol, which again is a good thing in most cases. But if your cholesterol is already low, cholesterol is a protective agent. So that's one of the reasons that you may want to be careful with it. If you already know your cholesterol is low and you don't want it getting any lower. It has some antimicrobial activity. So if you take it orally, that could cause some issues again, just like I described in the last episode of berberine. Anything that kind of is antimicrobial that you put in your digestive tract can and often does cause at least a little bit of issues of some kind because there are always some organisms in your digestive tract. So another reason it might be good to use the tincture form and put it on the skin, like I was saying I do. And it definitely has an anti-inflammatory effect. So because cortisol is an anti-inflammatory, so whenever you're lowering cortisol, there's always that, you know, you're kind of getting rid of an anti-inflammatory by doing that in a sense, but it has its own powerful anti-inflammatory properties. And some people as well, they even like to use Emodin for um, what do we call those neoplasm growths,
Yes.
the unwanted cell growth. And there are some studies around that, not in humans, but I can't remember, cell cultures or animals or something like that, but it seems to have some effect there. So I see a lot of good in it. It is like a plant alkaloid, and so in very high levels it can, it's a stress on the liver and stuff like that. But that's true of pretty much every herb to one degree or another. So I wouldn't do massive amounts of it. But at like low levels, I found it to be like 100% positive, no real downside. And so, except for that it has a kind of yellow orangey coloring to it, and so if you're applying it to your skin, it will stain everything that it touches, if it's not fully absorbed in the skin. So that's one practical downside, I guess.
Okay. So yeah, the practicalities of looking at it. There are some, how can you say, areas that you want to potentially proceed with caution with this one. When I'm looking at it, if you're taking it orally, it could cause some, you need to open up, it could be more of a release that you may not want. But so the tincture might be something if somebody's more interested in. It does sound like if you do have, high insulin, high blood glucose, then that could also be beneficial, as well as just kind of if you also know that you're a high cortisol individual, then this is something that could really help.
Yeah, and that last one you just said, I think, is the number one reason that it's used in isolation.
Okay. Okay. And then anything else to look out for if somebody decides that they do want to take this?
Um, I mean, in terms of dosing, the only downside I've noticed is like I've seen people use it during the day and then become too sleepy. Like
Okay.
that's potentially an issue. Not before operating heavy machinery, I guess, that kind of thing. But and yeah, orally definitely that laxative effect. But that's the main ones that I'm aware of at any kind of moderate dose for an even reasonably healthy person. Of course, a very, very unhealthy person always got to be careful of any kind of plant alkaloid potentially. Um, and then a very high dose, you've always got to be careful with plant alkaloid. But a moderate to low dose for a moderately to healthy person, I've not come across anything.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Because there's a lot of things out there for people with sleep, but this one sounds like, it's a good supplement to use if you've tried others and nothing's working.
It's more powerful. I'd, I'd actually say it's more effective than melatonin personally. Melatonin is kind of hit and miss with people. If melatonin works for you, great. If anything works for you, great. But yeah, I've just found the Emodin. It's more purely relaxing, even though I've put it under sleep. I've put it under sleep because I have a different thing for relaxation, I think, in this episode. And I would only ever use it at night. So that's why I see it as a sleep thing. But honestly, if you really need to calm down, it's obviously not going to be as strong as a Xanax or any of those kind of drugs. But I would say it's in between something like that and like a chamomile tea or something that's pretty mild. It's fairly impactful.
Okay. Right. Great. I haven't heard of it before, and maybe some of our listeners haven't. So something to look into for sure. Perfect. So we're going to move on to number two, which is going to be a very good lead in because we're talking about anxiety. So, what is your number one supplement recommendation for anxiety?
So it's one you probably have heard of before, viewer, listener, and Chrissy as well. But I'll give something that like makes it more effective than. So if you've tried it before and it didn't work, then hold on. And it's L-theanine. So L-theanine is an amino acid. Despite being an amino acid, it's not something the body makes itself, and it's not an essential nutrient. So I've kind of squeezed it in here in our non-nutrient supplement episodes. So it comes from green tea. Basically, that's where it's discovered. I believe that's still the main place that it's derived from. And so it came from this idea or from this investigation that normally most caffeine containing substances, whether it's coffee, normal black tea, yerba mate, all that kind of stuff. They all have a stimulating effect, like increasing wakefulness, but they tend to have a jittery kind of quality to them as well. Makes you jittery, anxious, maybe palpitations, maybe, especially, I know when you drink these things all day, every day, you don't have that kind of effect anymore. But let's say for someone who doesn't normally use them, when you then start to use them, it has quite a dramatic stimulating effect that isn't entirely positive from raising things like norepinephrine. But green tea, unless someone's very sensitive, it often doesn't have that impact. And it's not just about the amount of caffeine. I think it has roughly half the amount of caffeine as, say, black tea, but it's like half a cup of black tea will still be a lot more jittery and stimulating than a full cup of green tea. So they looked into, okay, so what is it? And it turns out it's this amino acid called L-theanine. It kind of balances out the anxiety promoting qualities of caffeine. And they looked into, and some of the other things that are in things like coffee and tea, like theobromine, theophylline. I think they're both in green tea to some degree. And so they looked into what it was, and anyway, it is a GABAergic. It is something that increases GABA, and GABA is the main sedating, calming neurotransmitter in the body. And so L-theanine increases that. Trying to think to make it relatable to people, because not everyone's tried Xanax, but everyone's had alcohol. So the thing about alcohol, where it generally makes you more relaxed, lowers your inhibitions, makes you more relaxed in terms of, like less likely to overthink, less likely to be holding yourself back, that kind of stuff. That's why a lot of people like alcohol. That's the GABA part of alcohol effect. So L-theanine, again, not as powerful as a large amount of alcohol, but reasonably powerful to increase GABA. And also it specifically increases GABA and reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain, and also where like the Freudian superego would probably be located. So that's the part that is telling you what you should and should not be doing. And so obviously we want that superego. The world would not be a great place without it. But some people overdo the superego. They're shooting themselves and other people, everyone around them, to death. And so reducing that a little bit, and that's even what can stop you sleep or can stop you relaxing or whatever. Oh, you should be doing this. You shouldn't be doing this. So to just calm all that down is very beneficial. So that's kind of the basic reason why L-theanine is generally recommended and why a lot of people take it. But L-theanine actually has a lot of other positive benefits. When I've studied it, like for instance, it helps to boost dopamine as well. So it has that great combination of GABA and dopamine, which often is really the secret recipe to feeling good. I mean, sometimes there's more to it, but for most people, if they have the alertness, focus, motivation, etc. of dopamine, plus the relaxation, calm, not getting upset, basically just staying relaxed element of GABA, that's like a really great combination that a lot of people would describe as being in the zone, where or a state of flow, maybe that would be another way of putting it. So L-theanine can help with both of those things. Now, if you've heard all that, and I've got a list, maybe I'll talk about some other benefits of it as well, because it's got loads, Chrissy. But if you've heard all that before and you tried it and you're like, it didn't do anything, here is my top tip. You didn't take enough.
I was going to ask you about dosage. So yes, tell me. Because we had talked about it previously. Because, yeah. So how much should one really look at for their dosage?
It's a great question. Now, you never want to overdo something to begin with because it may be too much for you. There are some people who are way, very sensitive to all kinds of stuff. And so starting at a very moderate amount of anything is wise. But if you've tried it before, if you're the kind of person who, takes a lot of stuff, barely notices anything, I think they're often sold in like 200 milligram capsules, that kind of thing. Like for the kind of person who's used to, I don't know, like alcohol and Xanax and SSRIs and all the rest of it, like that's not going to make a dent. I would say like try having more like a gram and then you can easily go up and have like 2 grams, something like that. I have not seen any kind of contraindications to those kind of doses. And that's an amount, again, it's still not going to be as strong as, like a powerful sedative, but it's an amount that, especially if you're not messing with a bunch of other drugs as well, that kind of skew things for you, it's an amount that will just make a bit of a difference. And how would you tell? Well, for instance, if you're wearing an Aura Ring or a Whoop or whatever, like you'll be able to see, maybe your stress rating goes down a little bit, your heart variability goes up a little bit, like it will just make an actual, noticeable difference. I say noticeable because some people are very unaware of themselves and the consciousness and what's going on in the body. So that's why maybe a device might help you to kind of pick up that fine tune thing, because again, it's not a massive difference. And then the other thing is if you take it, so I put Emodin as sleep and theanine as not sleep, because theanine you can really have at any time of day. I don't think it is like sedating. Again, for everyone other than maybe the very sensitive people. Whereas Emodin, I think, is pretty, sedating, because it really does seem to reduce that cortisol significantly. With theanine, a lot of people have it, for instance, with their stimulants. So if you drink coffee, if you have caffeine in various forms, it's great to have L-theanine with it. I really can't see a downside to it. It will just help to take the edge off any kind of over-adrenalized feelings that you may have as a result of having those things. So that's why, to me, L-theanine is an anytime thing.
Okay. Yeah, because I would have thought something that's calming necessarily wouldn't be so great during the day, but if you're really talking about it being not a sleep thing and more GABA, it's like you want to have that balance, especially if you are more prone to anxiety or, is stressful in a job, then this could be something that just helps you, not survive the day, but yeah, just be able to be like, oh, this is a little bit easier.
Exactly. And that was going to be the next use case I said. So one is with caffeine, but another one is, if you just had a spike of anxiety, maybe, you're late, maybe the boss has just, done something to upset you, whatever it may be. And then rather than kind of just stewing in it and, because it helps with GABA, it helps with that tendency to have repetitive thoughts where people kind of cycle over again and, like obsessing about things and all that kind of stuff. It can be very helpful with that. But because it has the dopamine boosting effects as well, I think that's why I put it in that different category. That's why I'm happy to recommend it really throughout the day. Now, obviously, like if you're flagging mid-afternoon, you're already feeling tired, is just theanine on its own going to be the perfect solution for you? Well, no, right? Because it's going to be, probably reducing your energy more. But as you just said, if you're already high on stress chemicals through one mechanism or another, does it help take that edge off? Yes, very effectively.
Beautiful. Okay. Definitely something to consider. And I'm really glad that you brought up the point about the dosage, that you're like, yeah, I tried it, didn't work. But you're like, but hang on a second. If you're somebody who regularly has had alcohol or taken something like a Xanax, then you potentially really do need to increase that dose just because your body's used to a certain level already.
Yes. Yeah. And, the other thing is it does cross the blood-brain barrier. That's one of the other things. So there are a lot of things that don't. So I think that's one of the reasons why it will actually affect the brain, which is quite interesting. So as I said, generally it's not recommended to have as much as what I just said. That is very anecdotal. But I'm just saying, like, if you have tried it and you're like, it doesn't work, it doesn't do anything, then just try a high dose. Just see what happens.
Okay. Good one to check out. All right, our next one on the list is focus. So, Elwin, what is your number one recommendation for focus?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. This is actually saffron. So I came across this. It's funny, when I first was creating the range for the Feel Younger store, that was one I included. And, we did all our product pages are quite elaborate. We talk a lot about the benefits. And so I put it all up there, but I did like 40 products. Once I'd done it, I just kind of shelved it away, and that was that. And I kept, when I'm like doing product formulations for people, which I sometimes do, or product formulations for my own ranges, which I do quite often, and I'm like looking at things that are beneficial for different things, I actually kept coming across saffron. It's got like loads of benefits that are very interesting, but the one that ended up being the most interesting to me was the benefits for ADHD. And so it turned out that there's a study, and if you remind me, Chrissy, which I'm sure you will, I'll give you the link for it, um, that showed that saffron was actually just as effective for people with ADHD as full-on ADHD medication, which was quite mind-blowing. Because a lot of things I've just said, I'm like, look, it's pretty good, but it's not as strong as, like the drug version. But yeah, in this study, it actually showed that it was actually as strong, that it was actually as effective as the drug version. And so, and anecdotally, I've seen a lot of people talk about it as well on social media, how it's really effective for them. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try it again. Because I think at the time that I wrote all this product pages, I didn't really identify as ADHD. And then maybe later I was like, maybe I do have that a bit. So I was like, okay, let me see if it helps. And actually, yeah, I found it to be great. I found it to be quite, what's the word? Dose. Like it's less have it every day and more. Well, you can definitely have it every day, but what am I trying to say? It's more like if you have to focus for the next few hours, have it right then. So, like I found it to be quite great in that way specifically.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code REJUVENATE to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code REJUVENATE to get 20% off today. Yes, please send me that link for that study. I'll put it in the description. So when you said you were looking at whether you identify ADHD, would you say that there's scales of it? Like, because obviously I just think as well in our society today, there's some confusion maybe on it. Some people think, because it's just sort of like this umbrella. Some people have certain aspects of it. So yeah, I'm just wondering, in a sense of, one, no matter what, if you're looking for focus and clarity, it's going to help. But what I'm hearing is if you have this, if you're potentially over here on this other side with ADHD or something like that, it can very, very, how can I say the right word? It's not coming to me. Maybe I should take some saffron. It can really, really, really help with the, with the focus and the attention in a greater way, especially without having to be on prescription medication.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually surprising when I looked at the mechanism of action of it, at least in terms of the neurotransmitters, it actually seemed to be quite similar to modafinil, which we've talked about before.
What is the mechanism? I was going to ask, what is the mechanism of action for the saffron?
Yeah, so in terms of the neurotransmitters, it modulates dopamine and norepinephrine upwards. So on its own, like that would be stimulated, like too stimulating. We just talked about we don't want norepinephrine, noradrenaline too high, but it also actually enhances GABA A receptor activity. So like it basically has that dopamine GABA thing that we just talked about. It has both as part of it. and then it reduces glutamate activity. So glutamate is kind of the opposite to GABA. So GABA is like the primary relaxing, what they call in science inhibitory neurotransmitter in the body, and then glutamate is the primary stimulating or excitatory neurotransmitter in the body. So if we look at its effect on GABA and glutamate, you'd say, oh, this is just purely relaxing. But then actually it's also boosting dopamine and norepinephrine, which would seem to have the opposite effect. But then overall, basically, it's kind of creating that thing that I just said of it's like it's calming, but at the same time, like boosting focus and attention and stuff like that, which is generally what people with ADHD suffer with, right? They go between being like, bored and demotivated and easily distracted, and then, anxious a lot of the time is what I've observed. So yeah, this kind of works on both. It does also boost serotonin, and that's something that why some people wouldn't like it. And I guess if your primary problem is that serotonin is too high, then that will be a downside to you. But I've seen some people, I believe, even in the repeat world, recommend saffron because of all the other elements of it. I guess they can forgive its serotonin boosting element. So yeah, maybe that would be the only thing that maybe is undesirable. Although, as we talked about recently in an episode about methylation, we could say some people tend to have a deficiency of both dopamine and serotonin, and because of they break it down more easily with their methylation pathways, and so it could be useful even then. And then, unlike modafinil, it also has loads of other benefits. So it reduces oxidative stress. It increases NRF2, which is this detoxification pathway that encourages the cells to release any toxicity they have. But in my experience, not at any level that promotes like an excess of detoxification. It reduces a lot of the inflammatory cytokines. It helps to protect the brain from degradation by enhancing BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. It improves synaptic plasticity, neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, which is the body's ability to make, the brain's ability to make new nerve cells, protects from amyloid plaque, which is considered to be currently one of the things that contributes to Alzheimer's. And it just goes on and on and on. I mean, for men, it also has this thing about boosting testosterone. I was really surprised. I was asked to formulate another ED supplement recently, a few months ago, and like I was like, all right, I've done this niche many times before, but let me just start from scratch, look at all the research from scratch. I was actually surprised to see that saffron was maybe in like, top 5 highest level scientific evidence that it was actually effective. Maybe through the dopamine thing again, because that makes a big difference, but I don't think that was only it. I think it was through a bunch of different mechanisms. Lowering cortisol as well. Sorry, I forgot that in terms of the neurotransmitters. Increasing insulin sensitivity. I won't carry on, but like I could go on and on basically. Like a huge amount of things that we know are really important. It seems to be really great for all of them. In terms of the kind of Indian spices, actually, it's like probably curcumin, you could argue, is the most disappointing. Like when you really look at it, it seems that a lot of the research around its benefits, are more questionable these days. And I know some people like black seed oil and cumin seed oil, and I think it's not bad, but I really think saffron, actually, of all the spices, is the one that's the most impressive and the most interesting. And ironically, one of the least used. And it's funny that it used to be so valuable, right? I think it used to be by weight, it was worth more than gold. I don't know. That
Gold,
may actually
yeah.
still be the case, I guess, because it's very light.
It's possible.
But
Yeah, to be fair, when I go to buy the spice in the supermarket, there's not much that comes.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, the whole kind of spice trade, like there was a big thing for a long time that a lot of trade was just based on these spices, people doing these perilous journeys across the world and all this kind of stuff. So with saffron, I'm starting to see some justification for it. It's like, wow, this is a really interesting herb. So a lot of people haven't heard of it. By all means, try it with Feel Younger, but also do the research. Look into what I'm saying. You'll see. You'll probably be as impressed with it as I am, I imagine.
So, are there any side effects? Like, if you were to take it, maybe take too much, that could it cause any kind of unwanted symptoms?
They're pretty rare. Like some people nausea and stuff like that, but given first of all, the dosage tends to be quite low. Like I can't remember what the Phil Younger one is. It like 15 milligrams or something like that. So it's not a large amount. Um, and yeah, surprisingly low, especially considering the mechanisms of action of it. It just seems to be safer than the vast majority of things, given what it actually does. So that's the other thing I really liked about it. I really couldn't come across anything that was in any way significant. If you know of anything, then let me know. Probably that serotonin thing is the biggest thing that I found. That would be like a potential red flag for me if someone's serotonin is already high. But it's not like St. John's wort or stuff like that. It's not going to be causing serotonin syndrome. There's not like a warning not to take it with SSRIs at the same time, for instance, like there is with things like St. John's wort. So even in that sense, I think it's pretty mild. So yeah, overall, one of the best side effect profiles of herbs I've found.
Great. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. So, the next one that we're moving on to, Elwin, is stomach health. So, what is your number one recommendation for stomach health?
I'm actually drinking it now in this glass of water. So when I say stomach, I mean stomach specifically. I know a lot of people, even doctors for some reason, they'll use the word stomach when they mean intestines or maybe the whole digestive tract. So when I say stomach, I mean specifically stomach. Now, what I'm about to recommend can also help with like the esophagus. It can probably help with the digestive tract to some degree, but it's usually specifically used for the stomach, and that's DGL.
What is DGL?
So DGL stands for deglycerized or glycerated, deglycerized, I think, licorice. So licorice is, I think, is everyone's familiar with what that is. Maybe they've had licorice sweets and stuff like that. Everyone's familiar with it, at least as a flavor. I remember as a kid, because my parents were hippies and into health. They would just buy us like twigs, like bits of wood that you would chew on. It tasted licorice, so it's actually just a plant that you can chew on. Um, but that was a treat back in my childhood. It tasted good. But yeah, so there's a downside to licorice, that it contains this component called glycerin. Sorry, not glycerin. I can't remember how to pronounce it. Maybe it is glycerin, but it's not like glycerin. It's spelled differently. Anyway, that raises cortisol.
Yeah, glycyrrhiza, something like that. Glycerin, but it's GLYCYRRHIZIN. Glycerin, something like that.
Yeah, that's why I just say glycerin, but it's probably wrong.
Yeah.
Um, it it raises cortisol. That's the key thing about it. And so it raises cortisol to such a degree that actually it's kind of known even in the medical community that you do not want to, like, oh, if someone has elevated cortisol, you could ask them, have you been, taking loads of licorice? Like that could be one of the reasons why. It has a pretty significant impact for a herb in raising cortisol. Now, if a person actually has low cortisol, which can happen and can be bad, it could actually be beneficial in that regard in raising cortisol. But generally, it's not desirable. That's why even though a lot of like Chinese medicine formulas will use licorice as they use it, I have a theory about why they use it, and I'll say that in a second, but their kind of explanation is it harmonizes all the other herbs in the formula. Um, and but they will only use a very small amount for this reason, I believe. And when I used to do formulas that were kind of TCM based back in the day, I would use a very small amount of licorice, the normal licorice, because you don't want to overdo it with the cortisol. Anyway, so deglycerated licorice basically means you get basically all the benefits of licorice other than the cortisol boosting without worrying about the cortisol boosting. And so what are the actual benefits? Well, again, there's a lot. I could probably read you a bunch again. But the reason why it's generally used and the reason why I like it is because it just coats and soothes the stomach. And so this can be good for a few reasons. First of all, some people, their mucous membranes has just a tendency to get like dry. People like a dry throat, for instance. You might even notice it in your mouth, and that happens in the stomach as well. And so the licorice goes in there and just kind of coats it and soothes it. It's similar, I guess, to the effect of aloe vera. But aloe vera has a very cooling kind of energy, and it has some fairly significant laxative effects. Like emodin is one of the ingredients in aloe vera, as we talked about earlier, and it has some significant antimicrobial effects. And so, like real aloe vera, like fresh aloe vera, can often create some symptoms of people that they don't like that DGL just doesn't seem to do. And then the other thing, aloe vera is very cooling. Some people, they don't want that. They want something more warming. So this goes back more to kind of like the Asian Chinese medicine-y kind of approach to things again. But they would say, like, if you have digestive issues, like for instance, if you struggle with digestion, a lot of the time it's that you lack a digestive fire. And so something like aloe vera, while it does coat and soothe the linings of the digestive tract, it also cools.
I was going to say it's cooling, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas DGL is the opposite. It's actually warming. So it's kind of like boosting that digestive fire. And so this could be good if it could definitely be good if you have any kind of acid reflux, GERD, any of that kind of stuff, because what that means is that the lining, in that case, the esophagus and maybe the mouth and the sinuses have been kind of burnt by the acid and the enzymes. And so the DGL will soothe that. But then also, if you have stomach ulcers or maybe pre-ulcers, but irritation, gastritis, any of this kind of thing, because the acid in your stomach is extremely acidic, right? It's so acidic, it will burn through a lot of things. And so your body has to have a special protective layer in the stomach to stop the acid just burning a hole in it. And so the DGL kind of helps support and build that protective mucosal layer in the stomach. Now, it's not solving your issues if you have a stomach ulcer. So it's not like if you have a stomach ulcer, just take DGL. But it's something that, a decent functional medicine practitioner, naturopath or whatever, would recommend as part of a strategy for that. And even some, I think, mainstream medical doctors are aware of it and recommend it for that reason, as like a soothing thing for the stomach. But, it doesn't have to be just that reason. So while stomach ulcers are reasonably rare, like acid reflux and all that kind of thing is extremely common. There's a lot of people, I think anti-acid medication is one of the most commonly used medication in the world. And so the problem with anti-acid medication is that your body needs stomach acid. We've done a whole episode on that, so I don't want to go through all that again. But basically, like the GGL does that soothing thing without killing the stomach acid. I guess that's the simple way of explaining it. And so I was using it for that when I was having stomach problems. But to be honest, I just still like it. Like I have a tendency to be dry. And so this is the other practical reason why I really like it. It really helps to, what's the word? And I think this is the reason why they add it to almost every Chinese medicine formula. It has a great ability to get rid of the grittiness of things. And so I discovered this with cholestyramine. So cholestyramine is kind of, but it also works with activated charcoal. So cholestyramine, activated charcoal. If you don't want to have capsules, if you want to have it as a powder, it's certainly a lot cheaper that way. It's a very gritty, unpleasant kind of taste. And so the cholestyramine that you normally get, like, what's the word? Not compounded, but just from the pharmacy, they have a bunch of like chemicals and sugar and stuff in it to make it a bit less gritty and more palatable. So I don't get that. I get the pure cholestyramine. But in either case, like it's just really gritty and unpleasant. So I found if you add just one capsule of DGL to it, it just magically makes the whole thing go down totally easily. It just completely gets rid of the grit element of it. As I said, same for activated charcoal. Clay doesn't really have that. So those are the two things I use it for. But anything that you're taking that's gritty, it is just incredible that it somehow just copes. So the same way that it coats and soothes, your digestive tract, it just coats these gritty particles to stop them just kind of being unpleasant as they go down. So that's the other practical reason why I really like it. But yeah, it's my number one thing for stomach. If someone has stomach issues and then maybe they've have done all they can to address the root cause. They just still have it for whatever period of time. The number one thing that they normally reach for is like an antacid. So I would say number one thing you should reach for is a DGL.
Okay. And then are there any kind of side effects or anything else with the DGL, with the licorice?
So the main side effects are with the G of DGL. So that's why it's good that it's been removed. It's the G that's the main thing. So I have not come across any at the reasonable doses that I've used or other people have used. And what's that? I mean, like even several grams a day of the extract powder, I have never come across any issues with those compared to anything else. So again, I'd put it in the class as some of the most safest herbs. And I talked to Dr. Miriam about it because I'm like, I just love the taste of it, so I'm using it like loads of it. Is there any problem with it? She said no. So yeah, anecdotally, no. There's always a chance of digestive discomfort and stuff like that. But as I said, I class it as way lower than most other digestive herbs.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Anything else before we move on to our next one with the licorice? With the, sorry, not licorice, the DGL.
Yeah, just like there's different ways you can take it. So there's capsule. If you just want it to go to the stomach, then take it in a capsule. But if you also want to soothe your esophagus, which a lot of people do if they have acid reflux and stuff like that, I don't recommend swallowing the capsule. What I recommend is opening the capsule up and pouring in your drink, water, tea, coffee, whatever. And you can also get these kind of sweets, DGL sweets with like xylitol or something like that in that you can suck on, and then it has more of an effect, especially of soothing and moistening like the mouth and even the sinuses and stuff like that. So there's kind of different ways of taking it. Basically, it's like a lozenge version as well, is what I'm saying, that you might also want to try, as opposed to those kind of cough sweets that people often use that again are full of crap usually.
Yeah, no, that makes sense too, because it's, well, like if you're just taking the capsule, it's going to bypass that. And also with the acid reflux coming up, then there could be some burning and things like that. So yeah, it makes absolute sense that there'd be a lozenge. Brilliant. Great. Yeah, thanks, Owen. Yeah, like me, I haven't heard of DGL before. So yeah, I'm hoping our listeners will, yeah, be able to give that one a go.
If they need it.
If they need it. Well, yes, well said. So the next on our list is cardiovascular health. What is your number one supplement recommendation for that?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of nutrients, it's probably vitamin K2, which we talked about before. I think that was a video for us that did pretty well. But in terms of non-nutrients, which we're doing today, it's nattokinase.
All
So,
right, talk to us about that. What is it?
so it's got A's at the end, ASE. So that means that it's an enzyme. Um, there are other enzymes that people might have heard of or have familiarity with, like serapeptase is quite popular in the health world, or lumbrokinase. Serapeptase is a bit different. That's more for dealing with fibrous tissue in the well, really anywhere in the body, but especially in the arteries. So it has benefits for that as well. But lumbrokinase is pretty similar to nattokinase, but nattokinase is really the one that seems to be the star that is like the most effective and the most efficient. So what does it do? It's really helping to, so it's an enzyme, and it's kind of even though you don't take it with food, you take it away from food, it's kind of in the digestive enzyme category, meaning it just comes in and gobbles stuff up. That's the non-technical way of explaining. And what does it gobble up? It gobbles up a lot of stuff in the blood that you don't want to be there.
Like what specifically?
Like stray proteins, for instance, large particles of proteins which are causing problems, fibrogen, excessive platelets, and to some degree as well cholesterol, which we don't want building up in the cardiovascular system. So a lot of the time when we think of what causes those things, like a heart attack, we think of plaque. And it's true that a buildup of plaque correlates with that. But actually, when I looked into this, and we talked about this a lot in the cardiovascular health episode, so full explanation there. But it's actually these other things, like fibrin and these aggregated platelets, like these clots, blood clots, that then will move and get loose and cause a blockage that then causes this, life-threatening situation. And so what nattokinase does is it goes in there, it breaks down this fibrin, which is this mesh that. So I have to explain a bit about the theory, I guess. So the theory is that the reason why the body doesn't just build up plaque and fibrin and all this stuff in the arteries for no reason. It's not stupid. It's doing it because it's trying to protect the lining of the arteries and to stop, in my opinion, something caustic from causing damage to that lining of the arteries, which
Because it could eat through that wall, correct? And then just, it's
causing
not
internal
good.
bleeding.
No
Absolutely.
bueno. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like I'd rather create a problem of building up more and more blockages, partial blockages in the arteries now than to allow this hole in the arteries to just cause internal bleeding and you just die straight away. It's like creating a long-term problem to resolve a short-term problem. Um, and so so fibrin is this mesh that basically like holds this blood clot together along with the plaque, and like it's kind of like a plaster. I'm wearing a plaster today. It's kind of like a plaster on the artery wall, and so that's good and that's helpful. But then imagine if I forgot to take the plaster off and I cut my finger again, and it's like there's more and more plasters building up, and now we're talking about something inside a tissue rather than over a finger, and so it just starts to get more and more blocked, and then eventually that can just break off, and then it kind of completely blocks the tube, and then that's where you have this life-threatening situation. So nattokinase will go in there and start to, as I said, eat that stuff is a good way of visualizing, but I guess degrade is the more scientific word, like break that down into smaller pieces that the body can then redirect away and deal with efficiently. And so yeah, it significantly reduces the risk of those blood clots becoming big and breaking off and causing a full-on blockage. Also, it breaks down something called plasminogen to plasmin. Again, it's the same thing, breaking it down into smaller pieces that are less likely to cause a blockage. And it also reduces the platelet aggregation. So platelets are these like literally the things that does the first line of defense of creating a seal. So when you cut your finger, the reason it doesn't keep bleeding is, initially it's the platelets, then it's the fibrin that kind of forms a mesh over the platelets, but it's this aggregation of platelets. And so again, appropriate for a cut, not so appropriate in the middle of your arteries or even on the wall of your arteries for very long, especially if it just keeps forming layer after layer after layer. So nattokinase again goes in there and breaks that up. And then, I won't go into more science. The other reason why the nattokinase is so, I guess, talked about these days is because it also degrades something called spike protein. And spike protein, whether that has come from some kind of virus manufactured in a lab somewhere, or whether it's come from some kind of experimental gene therapy manufactured in a lab somewhere. Either way, spike protein is something that will irritate the lining of the arteries again, which will again potentially get your body to do this build-up, which again, one thing that it leads to is myocarditis, which there's a lot of talk about these days. So, but myo just means muscle, card means cardiac, and itis means inflammation. So it's just inflammation of cardiac muscle. That's what it means. And so by breaking down, eating, degrading, whatever you want to call it, that spike protein, it stops that inflammation of the heart muscle tissue. It stops the inflammation of the arteries, which then causes the buildup of all the stuff that we just talked about. So it's very helpful on that level as well these days, for that reason. And so whether you have cardiovascular risk because of those gene altering things, the spike protein, whether you have cardiovascular risk because of all the usual health, lifestyle, diet stuff, whatever your belief is, whether you believe it's, fats or carbs or chemicals or whatever, something in the modern diet is, causing a buildup of plaque and ultimately inflammation and ultimately heart disease. And so nattokinase is like this super effective thing to fight against the tide. It's not resolving the root issue. It's not resolving the why your body is forming protective layers on an ongoing basis in the first place, but it is helping to clear away excesses of those protective layers, which will ultimately kill you. And so I still think it's definitely worth considering. And to some degree, it depends how you look at things. If you see inflammation as a root cause, then it is helping because it does directly support inflammation. I kind of see inflammation more as a response to a poison, or usually a series of poisons, and spike protein would be in that category, but so would lots of other things, heavy metals, pesticides, whatever. And so it's at least dealing with, maybe depending on how you look at it, a root issue of heart disease, and it's very effective. I guess that's the thing. I would, if I compare it to drugs, I would say it is more effective than most drugs. It is powerful. It is so powerful that you want to be a little bit careful with it. So if you overdo it, it could cause too much bleeding, just like potentially is the case with aspirin. This is particularly an issue of women who are menstruating. So if you have a large dose, or possibly any dose, during a period, you may well find that you bleed significantly more heavily. So that's something that you want to be aware of. Ditto if you're going to have surgery soon, or if there's any other reason why you might be bleeding, tooth extraction or cosmetic surgery, not just even serious surgery, anything that would cause bleeding. That's a reason why you might want to not have nattokinase for a while beforehand, because it really does thin your blood, significantly, and increases bleeding, reduces platelet buildup. And so, yeah, for overall, fantastic, because, depending on the country, about 50% of people die of cardiovascular disease. So this is like such a huge, big deal that everyone should be using, except for in specific cases, like I've just mentioned. But because it's so powerful, it shouldn't just be used indiscriminately. It should be used with some caution.
Okay, so when you say it kind of goes in and it cleans up these, the fibrin and other things, I just see it kind of like going in and eating it, but how does it actually do it? I mean, do you know?
It's an enzyme. So
Oh, okay.
what all enzymes do is they're like, chemical factories to convert one thing into something else. So degrading is probably a better word. Like, I guess you could say it's corrosive again, but it's taking a complex protein structure and breaking it down into lots of little amino acids again.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, like, because a lot of people are prescribed aspirin as a blood thinner for their cardiovascular health, but that comes with all different side effects. It's bleeding and ulcers and things like that. So, could nattokinase potentially replace that, or what would be the benefits there?
Yeah, so I know, some people are big fans of aspirin watching this, probably because Ray Pete was, and I know we have some Ray Pete loving viewers. I would say they have a different profile. Like, aspirin does a bunch of other stuff potentially that nattokinase does not. I have heard of the risk of nattokinase with bleeding, like with surgery and stuff like that. I actually haven't heard of it ever causing stomach ulcers. So I don't.
No, that was more aspirin. So yeah,
Sure,
so that's good.
but I'm
That's a
saying otherwise
positive.
it's pretty similar in
Yeah,
that sense.
yeah.
So I haven't heard of it causing stomach ulcers. Um, yeah, I guess it's a slightly different mechanism. So I would prefer the nattokinase to really clean up a lot of the residue of all this kind of arterial buildup. Um, Whereas aspirin, it is stopping that platelet aggregation specifically, but it's not like degrading a lot of the other stuff, is my understanding. I mean, aspirin is also anti-inflammatory. There's a lot of stuff you could say for aspirin being similar to nattokinase, to be honest, both in terms of benefits and side effect profile. But nattokinase does work on the spike protein. Aspirin doesn't. So that would be a vote for nattokinase. And Yeah, they're both anti-inflammatory. I'd probably, but for anti-inflammatory effects, I'd probably prefer aspirin. So if you've got a headache or whatever, I would go for an aspirin, not an nattokinase. But if you have, even though aspirin is not just can is protective in a cardiovascular level, I would prefer nattokinase for cardiovascular health and protection.
Okay. Well, as you've also just said, if there is potential there for bleeding, are there any other potential risks if somebody was to take nattokinase?
That's the main one that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And dosing?
Oh, and sorry. Well, I mean, there is also the possibility of uh, digestive upset because again, you're not like injecting it into your veins. I mean, technically, you're taking it into your intestines, um, and it is an enzyme that kind of breaks things down. So, I suppose, like with aspirin, even if you had a stomach ulcer, it might actually make it worse. Although I haven't seen any evidence of that, that would make sense to me. I would still be careful of it. Um, and Yeah, yeah, and I mean, allergy is always possible, but that's one of the other reasons because there's a bunch of people who are allergic to salicylates, which is basically like a plant, something that naturally exists in, I think, all plants or most plants, that a lot of people have issues with genetically. I say a lot, I mean, not like 50% of people, but not 1% either. I think it's 20-30%, something like that. So a lot of people can't handle salicylates. That's another reason why nattokinase would be more beneficial. But there is the occasional person with an issue of nattokinase as well. It does exist, but way less common than aspirin. And doses, yeah. I think the standard one is it 2000 FU? I think that's and that's I can't remember what that stands for. Fibrin consuming units. I think that's what the FU stands for. Um, and so a lot of people say, like 4,000 or even 6,000 FUs is cardiovascular protective. That's a pretty big dose, though. I would only have, first of all, I wouldn't have a woman on that for reasons we talked about, unless they're very fastidious about making sure to only have it at the right time of the month. Um, Second of all, I wouldn't just have the average person on that. I'd have a person on that who had like high triglycerides, high fasting insulin, high LDL cholesterol, like definitely if they have a high calcium score, stuff like that. If there's evidence that there's loads of stuff in their arteries that needs clearing, give them a high dose of nattokinase. But if we're talking more protective, I would have like a minimal dose, just like one capsule a day. And you need to have it on an empty stomach for it to actually be effective, because otherwise it'll just go in there and eat the food instead of being absorbed into the bloodstream and eating the proteins in the bloodstream.
Right. Well, that's a very, very good point because otherwise you could be, yeah, missing out on certain nutrients there if you're taking it with food. Okay. Yeah, so all nice questions. Is it the answer is things to think about? Would somebody stay on this forever, or would you just do it in like blocks?
That's a great question. So not the high dose, like I said, unless I mean, some people have a genetic tendency to just really build up the plaque and some of the bad types of plaque in the blood. Some of the bad types of cholesterol, sorry, the lipoprotein A and the LDL-C and whatever. And so if you have that genetic tendency and you always just have terrible markers in your blood, yeah, maybe even a high dose forever. But yeah, most people, most normal people, probably a low dose forever. Unless you really just had immaculate blood, and then you could just go, I just won't bother because it's a waste of time. Like if you had, no genetic risk, excellent markers, then you could say, yeah, that I don't really need it. But most people don't have that. So yeah, most people, especially beyond a certain age, 40, 50, whatever it might be, I'd say it's a very protective thing that, overall safer than aspirin. Just like they say you should take aspirin every day for cardiovascular protection. I think that is accurate, but I think nattokinase is better. And then we can't underestimate the gene modification thing, right? If you've
Yeah, and some people have had
Yeah.
multiple, yeah, exposures.
And if you volunteered for that, which I think the majority of the English speaking, at least planet did, then maybe you were lucky and your body only produced spike protein for a few weeks or whatever it's supposed to be. But there's, evidence, I think I shared it recently in one of the news episodes, that like some people's bodies just keep on and on and on and on producing that spike protein. And I don't know, there's not a particularly easy test you can do to just determine which of those two you are. Um, And then, there's arguments that even because this virus was, you know, bioengineered in the lab as opposed to natural, that maybe that's really the problem or also the problem. And again, once you have this virus and then different variants come out and we're continually being exposed to it, and so who knows, we may be frequently being exposed to a virus, because the different variants keep evolving, that again stimulating spike protein in our bodies. So for that reason as well, natto kinase is a smart choice to have as a preventative for the next time you get infected kind of measure. If you're just having it every day, then it means that next time you get infected, your body is more able to deal with that.
Next on our list, we are looking at colds and flu. So, Owen, what is your number one supplement recommendation for colds and flu?
I have to say, nothing in the kind of supplement world is super impressive in this regard. So I want to start with that caveat. But for me, like for a virus, specifically like a respiratory virus, a general one, not the type we were just talking about specifically, I actually think elderberry is better than the alternatives. Some people really like echinacea, I know, and that's more like the standard thing to recommend. But echinacea can make some people worse because it does boost the immune system. And for some, a lot of the symptoms you get are from your own immune system, not really the organism. And so, like the way elderberry seems to have more of a mechanism of action where it like prevents the replication of viruses and reduces the inflammatory response and stuff like that. So I think the science around elderberry is better. And that's why I think in Phil Young we actually have two different elderberry things. I think one also contains echinacea for people who like that. But that's my go-to thing. I like it. I still don't think it's like super, super impressive. But of everything, I think everything non-nutrient, I should say, I think it's the most effective and the most beneficial. And it is not only the first thing I reach for if I have a respiratory thing, it's the only thing I actually reach for. It's the only thing I think actually makes a difference.
Okay. So, with that, then any side effects? Do you just take it when you feel something coming on? Is it something that you would take consistently?
Yeah, I mean, side effects. Definitely don't just go out and pick some and eat them like I did, because once upon a time, because raw ones are slightly toxic to the body, depending on how many you have, very toxic to the body. So you want to make sure you have the cooked stuff. Usually it's like a syrup or, in a capsule or something like that. And then obviously they've already been prepared properly. But yeah, the amounts that are generally recommended, very, very little. And that's why I like it again compared to some of the other stuff that's out there. Um, I think, as always, a few people can have an allergy to it. As always, it can cause some gastrointestinal issues, but again, rare.
Okay. All right. And yeah, then again, is it just sporadic or would you do it consistently?
Definitely not consistently. Yeah, no, I'd only do it in response to if you're, I mean, all these things, they work better if you're not already sick, honestly. Once you're in the full-blown flu or cold or whatever, it's kind of more minimal. But if someone, if people around you are, if you're starting, it's always best to catch it early. If you're starting to feel the first signs of it or whatever, that's where it's most effective. And then keep taking it until, you have no signs of it anymore. But not something to have every day. Despite what I said about the side effect profile, I just think it also has pretty minimal benefits. So yeah, I just wouldn't bother otherwise.
Brilliant. All right. So, one to look out. Yeah. Because I mean, all you hear for me, all I've ever heard is echinacea, echinacea, echinacea. But, looking at elderberry, yeah, that's something to consider.
I think one of the other things I like about it, sorry, I'll just add, is like I have a tendency to be dry of anything, and so like it increases mucus production. And so, especially if you have a dry cough, I think that's the other thing that's really good about it. But on the other hand, if you've got a really snotty thing, I don't think it really creates any more. So I just think, again, it has that benefit. Like, that's the worst, right? With a cold, and afterwards you have like a dry cough and it's rattling and all the rest of it. It's just very unpleasant. I mean, the snotty phase, I guess, is quite unpleasant as well, but it's usually over after a few days, right? That's kind of one and done. So yeah, just remembered that's probably the other thing I like about it over most of the other cold stuff out there.
Well, that leads us perfectly into the next one because we're talking sinuses and potential sinus infection. So, what is your number one supplement recommendation for sinuses?
Yeah, I don't know if it's quite a supplement, but I guess it's in that category. What I really like for sinuses, and I've tried so many things because like sinus is the bane of my life. It's actually a xylitol spray. Xylitol spray, super, super, super effective. I actually first came across it during the COVID time because people were saying that. Um, so basically, it's a spray bottle, nasal spray, mostly water, a little bit of xylitol, spray it in these nostrils. So people are saying like if you do that, it's like 98% protective from COVID, or in fact, any kind of virus, any kind of bacteria from breathing it in. Um, and there's lots of studies about it actually being very effective. So um, I used it and I was like, I don't know if it's protecting me from anything because I never actually get any of that kind of stuff anymore. But what I loved about it is it's just like, it really seems to um, like moisten the sinuses, which, as I said, mine tend to get dry. But if you're the opposite, if you tend to get, because basically with sinuses, there's two issues you're going to get. There's either dryness or congested, right? Now, if you're dry, it just moistens them all and it makes you feel so much better. But if you're congested, like it just makes it start to run. So then you can blow your nose and you can clear it out. So in either case, it seems to be, very effective. It is very, it is killing a lot of different organisms. And it is protecting against being contaminated by those organisms when you're breathing them in. Uh, so I would say it's hugely beneficial. I'd say always have one around. And by the way, I have a theory which I haven't tested very extensively, but I've tested this a few times and it's been true every time. When people say they have a headache, it's like, well, the brain doesn't have any nerves, right? That's why you can do, brain surgery if you've ever seen it, right? And the person's chatting and the surgeon's poking around in their brain with a scalpel or whatever. Um, so what is it that's actually hurting in the case of a headache? Now, sometimes it's certainly tension in the kind of muscles around the scalp and um, the top of the head, obviously. But in my experience, a lot more often than people suspect, it's actually really the sinuses they're experiencing when they say they've got a headache. And my proof of that is a lot of the time people say headache, I give them a xylitol spray, they spray it, and then within a few minutes they say, oh, I feel better. Like, and what it actually was is like, a dryness in the sinuses that they hadn't identified as a headache. This took me literally years to figure out, Chrissy. Like years and years and years. I never had headaches, but I had like, maybe I did have headaches. I just didn't call it a headache. I just had like weird feelings in my head, which I didn't like. And sometimes it made me feel dizzy. I couldn't think clearly. All this kind of stuff was not fun. Um, and and the Zytel spray resolved it for me, really. And then, yeah, for other people, I think they call it a headache. And then same thing, just try the xylitol spray. As I said, I don't think it'll work every time because sometimes it is down to patterns of tension in the muscles around the skull. But I'm surprised at how often it does work. Basically, it's worked every time I've tried it, but I've only tried it a handful of times on different people. But yeah, like just try it. If you have a headache, instead of reaching for a paracetamol or whatever you do, just try doing a xylitol spray because all these NSAIDs, ibuprofen, paracetamol, all these kind of things are very dangerous. Like tens of thousands of people die of them every year. Liver toxic, can cause internal bleeding in the digestive tract, all of this kind of crazy stuff. Xylitol spray, to answer your next question, I'm not aware of any side effects. Xylitol can have side effects if you consume too much of it in your digestive tract, because again, it's killing certain organisms. So people used to use it like an alternative to sugar with baking and desserts and stuff, but they realized it often causes more digestive discomfort than sugar because it is having this effect on the microbes in your gut. But yeah, like in terms of the tiny amount that is all that's needed in the nasal spray, I've never heard of any side effects. It just seems to be very low risk and potentially very high reward.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you bring up a really valid point about the dryness too, especially like when you've got the heating on or the air conditioner, whatever, it's drying out the system, that just having that moisture going in there can be extremely, extremely beneficial.
Yes,
So, yeah.
but the way you just said it reminded me of something. Yes, but there's something about it, like squirting just water up there is not going to moisten it. In fact, it will dry it. And in fact, a lot of people do these neti pots with water and salt. Salt is a drying agent. So if salt helps you and neti with salt water helps you, great. I'm not saying for those people, if it works, it works. And salt is like a disinfectant as well that can clear a lot of stuff out. But if your problem is, salt will help to get mucus moving as well. So again, salt water, I'm not against it if it works. But the xylitol specifically has this moistening impact when it's in water, similar to DGL that I was talking about earlier. But I wouldn't put licorice up your nose. But with xylitol, it's fine. It works.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Owen Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code REJUVENATE to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code REJUVENATE for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. So now we're going to take a look at Libido. Elwin, what is your number one supplement recommendation for Libido?
Yeah, so again, we've done a whole episode on this with a bunch of recommendations. And if you have low libido, there's probably a load of stuff going on there that needs to be addressed. But this episode is just about giving you one supplement. So my number one supplement for this is Tonkat Ali extract. It's quite well known. I would say if you've tried it before and it didn't work, it may just be because it's not resolving your root cause of low libido, admittedly. I should also add this is probably going to be more effective for men than women, although
I was going to ask if women could take this as well.
no, yes, but it's definitely going to be more effective in men than women. But there are definitely studies where women have taken it. A lot of women worry about any kind of testosterone boosting herbs, so it's going to give them huge muscles or like loads of facial hair or something. And all the men taking them are like, I wish, like they're really not that impactful, unfortunately. But they can be a bit impactful. And Tankatali, so again, whenever I'm asked to formulate something, that libido boosting or erection function boosting or testosterone boosting, anything like that, I always start with a blank slate and like, let me look at the latest research, blah, blah, blah. But I always end up including Tonkat because there's just so much evidence for it. It has loads of benefits other than the three things I just said as well. It's like great at reducing cortisol, for instance, which might be yet another one of the reasons why it's effective, because one of the reasons why people have low libido is because they have high stress. So it may well work in that mechanism as well. It's boosts the immune system. It's got a bunch of antimicrobial activity as well. Like it does a lot of different, very interesting things. But probably if I had to like explain why it's in the formula, the number one thing I'll probably say is that it boosts the levels of free testosterone. And there are very good studies showing that is exactly what it does. The other thing is just anecdotally, like I have it in my cupboard and it's not something I use every day, but the amount of times that I've just like started taking it because I'm just like, I don't know, why not? I just kind of rotate through things and then I just forget about it. And then suddenly I just have this massively boosted libido and I'm like, why? And then like I remember later, oh yeah, I started taking the Tonkat Ali again. I don't really get that impact from anything else. Now you could just say, okay, well that's specifically just me and idiosyncrasies of whatever was me. But that's why I started off by talking about the research, right? The research just consistently shows that it's very effective. Most of the research has been done on men, admittedly. So I'm going to give it as a libido booster for men, rather than for women. I think women are more complicated, both in terms of their hormones and in terms of the reasons for having a low libido. And so just giving one supplement probably isn't going to work. Although if I could recommend one hormone, I'd probably go for oxytocin. As we've talked about before, that kind of does work no matter what the cause is. But yeah, in terms of supplements for men, Tonkat Ali, very effective. It does seem to have a stronger effect when you first take it than if you take it every day. So if your next question is going to be how often should people take it? Yeah, I would say as needed.
Okay. So like in the moment sort of thing, or just thinking like, let me build up here, or
Just even like in the morning, if you know that you're going to want to, I don't know, let's say you don't have sex every day and you only do it in the weekend because you're too tired 5 days a week or whatever, then have it Saturday and Sunday, that kind of thing. Or yeah, rather than necessarily every day. I think if it's part of a formula, it can work taking it every day because then there's loads of different things and loads of different mechanisms of action. So that makes sense. But when you're only having that one thing, I just found it's like as needed works better, and at a high dose.
and what is that high dose?
So it depends on how extracted it is. It's often like 50 to 1, 100 to 1, 200 to 1. Sometimes it's not that. It's like standardized by the active ingredients. Is it Eurocome, something like that it's called. Sometimes it's standardized to like 5% of the active ingredients, sometimes 10%. But honestly, I have found that whatever is claimed on the label, I mean, you definitely don't want to just get the raw powder. Like cheap formulators will just put in, if it just says Tonkat Ali and it doesn't say an extract and it doesn't say an amount of that it's like 100 to 1 or whatever means, by the way, if anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, 100 to 1 means that for every 1 gram you've got in your capsule, that's 100 grams worth of herb. They've just boiled it down, distilled it down. Um, so, and then the other thing is standardized is like what percentage of what's in the capsule is this active ingredient. So those are the two ways usually that they classify herbs. If it doesn't have either of those things, it just means that they've shoved some Tonkat Ali powder in, which is basically useless. It has to be
Has to be
extracted.
the extracted.
Yeah,
Okay.
it has to be significantly extracted. But what I was going to say is, no matter what it claims on the label, to be honest, I've noticed a vast variation in quality between different brands. So unfortunately, and I don't want to recommend one because
It changes.
it
Things change.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So you might have to try a few different brands basically, but at least you know what to look for. Some people say the standardized buy is more powerful. I've not actually found that to be the case though. I've found the high ratio ones to be sometimes really powerful as well.
Fantastic. Okay, so take it as and when needed, especially because it's an isolated supplement. It's not in a formula for other things. Any side effects or anything like that if somebody's potentially taking it?
Yeah, I mean, other than the obvious, I mean, it's pretty hot, dry herb as herbs go. So, um, it can potentially make you, a little bit agitated or irritated, I think, emotionally. Um, the kind of things people associate with testosterone, but which isn't really testosterone, but more going back to the kind of Eastern way of looking at things, I just see it as like a quality of the herb thing, like it's just heating, and then it's just drying as well. And so if you have a tendency to be dry, then it may make that worse. And so you may want to balance that out with, some of the other things we talked about, like the DGL or whatever. Um, so in terms of, it's kind of a bitter herb. So if your liver's very weak, it's going to put a bit of strain on your liver. Um, and it can cause a bit of digestive upset as usual, like everything, pretty much. Any herb that you're putting in your digestive system probably has a risk of causing digestive upset. But all of those things are pretty mild and pretty unusual. It doesn't have, like your himbo, stuff like that can elevate blood pressure and all these kind of things that are more concerning. Tonka Ali doesn't have anything like that at the doses that are usually used.
And so let's say somebody does have the extract, it's 100 to 1 or it's 200, whatever that part is. What's the dosage that they should take?
So it just depends on all of that, and then it also depends on what it actually is as opposed to what it claims. Um, but 1 or 2 capsules of something that is supposed to be strong that you believe is strong, basically.
Our last one, and thank you all for joining us, and this is going to be a quick one, appetite reduction. What is your number one supplement recommendation for that?
Yeah. So, I'm not a huge fan of GLP-1s, as we've talked about before, like Ozempic and all that kind of stuff. I understand in certain cases, especially in very low doses, they can make sense. But the basic concept of if you eat too much, let's resolve it by making your stomach feel full for longer by slowing down how fast the stomach empties. I just don't think that's correct, because there is a better mechanism that already exists inside the body. So there's a hormone that tells you to be hungry, that you are hungry, called ghrelin, and then there's a hormone that tells you that you are satisfied, and it's leptin. And so the problem with leptin is not so much that you have low levels, but that your body gets desensitized to the leptin. So similar to insulin, which we talked about in the last episode briefly, you can become resistant to leptin. And so there are certain substances that help to improve leptin sensitivity. And one that I have discovered, I think I mentioned a different one before in the episode that we did about how basically all obesity is caused by hormonal imbalance, which I stand behind. Um, but that ingredient is pretty hard to get, and this one that's a lot more common called African mango. And I've actually found that both in terms of studies and anecdotally to be just as effective, at least at an effective dose. So it's African mango seed usually, and yeah, there's just a bunch of studies that show that it does actually improve leptin sensitivity and reduce leptin resistance. There's a bunch of studies to show that when people use it consistently, if all other factors are the same, that they lose weight, especially fat weight. They lose weight around the waist, for instance. And there's a bunch of studies that show that it helps people reduce appetite. Why it is not more well known or well used, I don't really know. The side effect profile on it is not amazing, so I guess that could be one of the reasons, but it's really not like terrible either.
Well, I suppose too, there are with the GLP-1s, there are those significant impacts, as we have talked about in previous episodes, especially with the disruption potentially to the metabolism and other things. So, that doesn't come without things as well.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, exactly. To me, I mean, definitely, the African mango is definitely safer than GLP-1s. Um, I mean, you could argue that, the African mango is not as effective. And I would say, yeah, African mango at the doses it uses are not as effective as like the high doses of Ozempic or other things like it that are routinely used. But those high doses are dangerous, like even admittedly so. There's a huge list of side effects when you take it, and they have to assess you beforehand to make sure you don't have a bunch of medical issues. Otherwise, it's definitely going to be dangerous and all this kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of comparing apples to rhubarbs or whatever. It's just a completely different thing. But if we compare African mango to like a very mild dose of GLP-1s, um, where the effects are probably going to be pretty similar, then the African mango to me still, first of all, it's working on a better mechanism. And then second of all, yeah, the side effect profile is still better. So I think that's more of a fair comparison. And so I like it for that. Plus it has other benefits. So it's been shown as well to lower elevated blood sugar. It's been shown to reduce triglycerides, reduce LDL cholesterol. It's been shown to lower C-reactive protein when used, which is a measure of inflammation, the most common measure of inflammation when you do blood tests. It even has some antimicrobial and antiparasitic effects. It could potentially help with ulcers. So yeah, there's loads of kind of benefits to it as well that you don't see with any GLP-1s. Well, you might see them in GLP-1s, but it's all through because you're eating less, you're poisoning yourself less, and therefore you are healthier. But with this, there's actual kind of, mechanisms, because it is, a herb with loads of different active ingredients rather than just one, that's working on all these different levels. So yeah, it's very, very, it's very desirable. Now, I'm not going to use it because my appetite, if anything, is low. But if I ascertain with anyone that their problems are caused by eating too much, and that doesn't even have to be someone who's overweight. Some people, they have digestive problems because they're eating too much and stuff like that. Then this is really, very good. It can cause digestive distress, as always, can cause headaches. If you have very high doses for a long time, then it could lead potentially to toxicity, but this is like the kidneys and liver. But again, this is true for most herbs. But yeah, it's not as safe as some of the herbs we've talked about today. That's the only thing I don't love about it. But a lot of the studies, people are using like 1,000 milligrams a day, 2,000 milligrams a day. But I'd say like even 250 milligrams a day, maybe 500 at the outset is, very safe.
Well, I haven't ever heard of that one, so that's a really good one. It's one of those things, and this is why I love doing episodes like this, because you do bring to the forefront other alternative options for people to consider and look at that are potentially have less side effects and are more of a natural solution or alternative to things that are out there or potentially are getting more attention and more focus for people to look at. So thank you. I know we're coming here to time, so are there any final thoughts before we close?
Yeah, if people who have any objections to any of this, I realize nothing is side effect free. And I realize there's always some people who are like, just get sunlight and eat well and exercise and everything will be good. And sometimes they're right. I mean, all these interventions I've listed today and in other episodes are definitely not always necessary, and they're probably not necessary as often as they're used. But my point is people are already using all kinds of stuff. And so a lot of the time I'm just giving what I consider more effective, safer, or hopefully both interventions for people who are already taking stuff. And that's really the point. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Just like with the last episode, if you feel like there is something better for any of the different issues that we've mentioned today that is more effective, then let us know in the comments. If you think that there is something, if there's something else you're like, oh, for this issue that you didn't say, oh, and this is what I really like, let me know. I'll probably try it if you recommend it. And then I might report back at it and you'll be able to say, oh, I'm the one who told them about that. So let us know. And then as always, please share the episode with people. I really appreciate it. The only way that we can carry on doing this, to be honest, is if we keep growing. We need to keep growing in order to be able to keep justifying all the time and money and stuff that we're putting into it. So I know that's not your responsibility, but I would appreciate if you could help out just by liking, commenting, subscribing on whatever platform you're listening or watching on, and then really sharing as much as possible, as often as possible. And if you're already doing that, because I see a bunch of you doing it, thank you. I appreciate it.
Definitely. And we very much appreciate your time as always, everyone. And Ellen will look out for you guys in the comment section, as will I. And we'll see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode. And one of the ones I recommend is just here, if you want to click there. Or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.